Happy New Year, everybody. I'm James Zimmerman, and I'd like to welcome you to today's history lesson about the Kansas City Symphony's storied clarinet section. If you've been on the audition circuit at any point this century, chances are you've auditioned for this orchestra, perhaps more than once. In the last decade, I've posted so many things about this orchestra on clarinet jobs, and I thought it'd be fun to reflect on all of the great players who have played and still play in this orchestra. So, once upon a time, in a place not too far away from here, about 600 miles from where I am right now, the Kansas City Symphony was formed out of the ashes of the recently dissolved Kansas City Philharmonic. Some other cool things also came out in the year 1982, like E.T. and... Those two knew each other, by the way, I didn't know that. And for whatever it's worth, I also came out that year. But I digress. From 1982 until the year 2000, the Kansas City Symphony clarinet section consisted of the same three people, John Wiener, Bobby Roberts, and Forrest Philpott. With John Wiener's retirement at the end of the 2000-2001 season, a domino effect was set off that is still going on to this very day. So here's what we'll do. We'll start with a map of the USA. We'll put the year up here in the Saskatchewan-Manitoba area. We'll keep track of how many auditions have been held down here in the Gulf of Mexico. And over here, off the coast of Florida, we'll keep track of how many players have come through the Kansas City clarinet section. As for me, I'll be over here, in Hawaii. The first audition of the century was in November 2000 for principal clarinet. That audition was won by a guy named Ben Freimuth. Whoops, wrong picture, sorry about that. Ben's actually a really handsome guy when he's not dressed up as Gumby. So that's one audition and one player. During the next season, Bobby Roberts retired, and there's an audition in spring 2002 for the second and E-flat clarinet position. That audition is won by Greg Williams. I had the pleasure of playing with Greg Williams that whole summer at the National Repertory Orchestra in Breckenridge, Colorado. Here's a picture of me, Greg, and Alucia Scalzo from that summer. We'll hear more about her in a minute. The very next year, during 2002-2003, Ben Freimuth wins the audition for bass clarinet of the San Francisco Symphony. Ben is a monster bass player. Listen to me, him, and Ralph Sciano playing some Nelly Bell trios at my house a few years ago.
I was hoping you were going to do that.
Good stuff. You know what's funny about that is both of them are in the Cincinnati Symphony now. So Ben leaves Kansas City in 2003 and heads out to San Francisco. Bye, Ben.
If you're going to San Francisco.
So now Kansas City has no principal, so they schedule a one-year, possibly permanent principal clarinet audition in August of 2003, which Greg wins. So he's...
Well, we're moving on now. Moving on.
But now they have no second and E-flat player, so they call Michael Wayne, who was a finalist in this audition. Michael told me in a text message that, quote, I was called on my birthday, September 13th, to ask if I was interested in coming to KC for the year. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom in Phoenix when I got the call, not knowing what I was going to do for the rest of my life, as I had recently graduated from the University of Michigan with no prospects. How's that for a birthday present?
Happy birthday to you.
So 2003 starts with Greg, Michael, and Forrest. Here they are, all dressed up in some kind of Halloween costumes, I guess, or maybe that's just the way they dress. Michael's contract is extended for another year for the 2004-05 season, and that year Ben Freimuth decides to stay in the San Francisco Symphony, so Greg becomes the permanent principal clarinetist of the orchestra. The orchestra then holds a national audition for the job Michael is currently playing because Michael was given that job as a result of being a finalist in the August 2003 principal audition, and Michael wins that job in the spring of 2005. So we've had the same section for 2 years now, but this is the Kansas City Symphony, so nothing ever stays the same for long. In the fall of 2005, Greg wins the audition for Associate Principal in E-flat Clarinet of the Minnesota Orchestra, and he's offered the job there after a trial in the spring of 2006, so he heads up there. Coincidentally, this is where I was at the time, studying with Bert Hara at the University of Minnesota. Greg was kind enough to listen to me as I prepared for a few auditions, and he was very generous with his time and knowledge, so I'm extremely grateful for that. Greg's departure left Kansas City with no principal for the upcoming season, so Michael moves up to acting principal for 2006-2007.
Well, we're moving on now. Moving on.
And Ben Lulich is appointed to second. Michael and Ben go all the way back to high school, where they both studied with Richard Hawkins at the Interlochen Arts Academy. Incidentally, the second position changed that year from second and E-flat clarinet to associate principal, second and E-flat clarinet. So now it's 2006-2007, and in the spring, Kansas City has a national audition for principal clarinet. This created the potential for an odd situation, because if Ben Lulich had taken the audition and won, Ben and Michael would have switched chairs. However, less than a month before the audition, Ben Lulich won principal clarinet of the Pacific Symphony, and a couple weeks before that, he also won principal clarinet of the Memphis Symphony. I wonder what Elvis would have to say about that.
Totally insane.
Oh, okay. The audition that Ben won in the Pacific Symphony was actually an audition for both the principal and second clarinet jobs, and I won the second clarinet position. So Ben and I headed west at the same time. Michael did end up winning that principal clarinet audition, but they still had to replace Ben, so they brought in Alucia Scalzo. Michael and Alucia go all the way back to 2001, where they met at Music Academy, and Alucia had played in Canton and Grand Rapids and New World, so she was a good choice for the position. So 2007-2008 is underway, and more changes coming in Kansas City because on November 5th, 2007, Michael Wayne wins the audition for second clarinet of the Boston Symphony. I remember this date so vividly because I was runner-up to Michael in this audition, and it was the most devastating day of my professional life. I cried in my warm-up room, and then some more times after that. Thankfully, Michael's a very gracious person, even when I was like,
I'm so happy for you. Thank you. Thank you both very much. I owe you both a debt of gratitude.
Side note, if you're not willing to take a few punches along the way, don't choose this career path. So Michael heads to Boston at the end of the season. But it's all good, because I got back up, I kept swinging, and later that season I won my job here in Nashville.
Nashville cats, Wakefield country water.
Ben Lulich was, understandably, a little grumpy. I was sad too, because we had had so much fun playing together.
Yes! Oh!
Yes!
I'm so thankful I got to play with Ben that year. I never would have won Nashville without him. So Kansas City's stuck without a principal again, so they have another one-year, possibly permanent audition for principal clarinet, and this one is won by another birthday boy, Raymond Santos. Raymond told me in a text message, quote, I know for sure my audition was March 31st and April 1st, 2008, because I won on my birthday. I said, that is fabulous, and he says, I did it in style. Raymond is a guy with a lot of style. A month later, Kansas City holds an audition for associate principal, second, and E-flat clarinet, and nobody wins. Alucia had already decided to go home to New York after this season, so now they're stuck without a second clarinet again. So, Min Na Lee is appointed. Raymond and Min Na knew each other from college, and they had gone to Tanglewood together in 2006. I was also there. So she was a good choice for the job. So now it's 2008-2009, and we have Raymond, Min Na, and Forrest. During this year, there's an audition for the associate principal, second, and E-flat position, and you'll never guess who wins. Raymond. He takes the audition just in case Michael Wayne decides to come back from the Boston Symphony, which he doesn't, so the job is offered to Raymond's runner-up, Boris Allakhverdyan. Boris also won my old job in the Pacific Symphony, and he called me as he was trying to decide what to do, and he ultimately decided to go to Kansas City. Min Na heads up to the Rochester Philharmonic. So 2009 starts with Raymond, Boris, and Forrest, and there are actually no auditions in Kansas City this year. But here's a picture of Raymond and Boris from around that time. Also, at the end of the season, Ben Freimuth moves from San Francisco to Cincinnati, where his wife Liz is principal horn. And this was the first of 4 seasons in which Alucia played acting second clarinet of the New York Philharmonic. The next year is Forrest Philpott's last year in Kansas City, so there's an audition that spring for the third utility and bass clarinet position, and Rachel Stutzman wins. This is the last ever clarinet audition in the old Lyric Theater, and Rachel starts the following fall in the brand new Kaufman Center. Rachel Stutzman ends up going back to Pittsburgh where she was previously, so there's another bass audition in the spring of 2012, and this one is won by Su-Ying Huang. So the fall of 2012 starts with Raymond, Boris, and Su-Ying, and this will be Boris's fourth and final year in Kansas City because in May of 2013, Boris wins the position of principal clarinet with the Metropolitan Opera. So, bye Boris. Boris's departure left a vacancy in the second chair, so Emil Hudayev is appointed to that position. Emil came highly recommended by his current teacher Yehuda Gilad, with whom Raymond and I had also studied. So 2013 begins with Raymond, Emil, and Su-Ying. There's a couple of notable moves outside of Kansas City this season. First, early in this season, Ben Lulich wins principal clarinet of the Seattle Symphony.
Hello, Seattle, I am a mountaineer.
In the spring of 2014, there's another bass clarinet audition in the Kansas City Symphony, and Gabby Campos Zamora wins this one. And not too long after that, Su-Ying moves to the other side of Missouri to join the St. Louis Symphony. And just to make things a little more complicated, Emil leaves the Kansas City Symphony at the end of the season to join the faculty at Interlochen Arts Academy. Check out this photo from Interlochen, from left to right. Yehuda, Emil, Ben Lulich, and Boris. So now we have no second player in Kansas City again, so John Klinghammer is brought in from the Omaha Symphony. So it's 2014 now, and we have Raymond, John, and Gabby. In the spring of 2015, there's a national audition for Associate, Second, and E-flat of Kansas City, and Lin Ma wins. Remember this, when he won Fort Worth, and then Kansas City, and then Baltimore? Well, he ultimately went to Baltimore. Gabby was runner-up to Lin Ma, though, so Gabby and John switched chairs for the following season. So at the beginning of 2015-2016, we have Raymond as the tenured principal, Gabby on tenure track for Associate Principal, Second, and E-flat, and John on a one-year contract playing bass. There's a national audition this season for bass which nobody wins, which kind of sucks for John, but just keep watching, it's going to work out okay. During this season, Gabby won principal clarinet of the Minnesota Orchestra, so he goes up there and joins Greg in that clarinet section. So John moves back to the second chair, and Jungwon Lee is brought in to play bass for the next year. Raymond knew Jungwon from college, and Jungwon had just done well in the New York Philharmonic's bass clarinet audition, so he was a good fit. Speaking of New York, during this season, Boris won the audition for principal clarinet of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, so he heads out west. So we're up to 2016-2017 now, and we have Raymond, John, and Jung-hwan. Remember Emil? At the beginning of this season, he wins the newly created position of Associate Principal Clarinet of the Seattle Symphony, so he goes and joins Ben Lulich.
Hello, Seattle, I am a mountaineer.
And of course, Kansas City's got to have some kind of clarinet audition because Raymond is the only tenured player in the section, so they go with a bass audition. They hold that audition in February of 2017, and guess who wins? John Klinghammer. I love this Facebook post that John put up right after he won the audition. Thank you everyone for all your kind words of congratulations, your encouragement over the years, your friendship. I have auditioned for the Kansas City Symphony either 6 or 7 times in my life. Can't remember for sure. So happy I finally got it right. You know what I love even more is this picture of John taken at Kansas City's Charlie Parker Memorial in the year 2000, right after John took the audition that Ben Freimuth won. And you know what I love the most? John, in the midst of all these 1 years, falls in love with Kansas City Symphony cellist Maria Crosby. Then he quits the Omaha Symphony at the end of the 2015-16 season with no permanent job prospects on the horizon. Then he wins the bass audition like a boss, proposes to Maria in the summer of 2017, and she says yes! Congratulations to both of you. Hold on though, there's a vacancy in the clarinet section, so let's get back on track. With John's move from temporary second to tenure track bass, there's a vacancy in the second chair, so Rebecca Tobin is brought in. Rebecca had previously been on a one-year contract in the National Symphony, and Raymond and Rebecca had both studied with Richie Hawley, so this was a good fit. So after 18 years, 14 auditions, and 15 different players, that brings us to today. At the end of this month of January, there will be a national audition in Kansas City for Associate Principal, Second, and E-flat Clarinet, which will be the 15th audition of the century. I'll post the results on Clarinet Jobs as soon as I find them out. So, what have we learned from all this? First of all, we can conclude that the Kansas City Symphony holds really good clarinet auditions because they have an excellent track record of identifying great players from auditions, so hats off to them. When we were getting ready to have our Assistant Principal, Second, and E-flat Clarinet audition here in the Nashville Symphony last spring, Raymond Santos was the first person I called for advice. I talked to Greg Williams too. Both of them helped me a lot. Secondly, we learned that every time you play, whether it's in school or at a gig or at a summer festival, that's a part of your audition. None of these people who were appointed to positions in Kansas City were picked at random. They qualified themselves through their previous experience and reputation. So if that's the stage of the game you're at now, remember that how you play and act now might have important future implications. Thank you so much to everybody who contributed to this project. Many people rummaged through their scrapbooks and emails and the deep recesses of their minds to make this video possible, and I deeply appreciate those efforts. I hope you all had as much fun watching as I did pulling it all together. So good luck to everybody who's getting ready for the Kansas City audition in a few weeks, and I'll see you soon.
They got some crazy little women there, and I'm gonna get me one.